Hey, welcome. So this is another episode of Emergent Conversations, a Hilltop podcast. Today our guest is Paty Ruas, who is one of our mentor educators at our downtown location, and I'm your host, Alfonso. Paty, thank you for being on.
Yeah.
I guess one of the first things we want to start is just to get to know you. So what are some things you want to share about yourself so we can get to know you a little better?
Well, my name is Paty Ruas. My pronouns are she, her, and I was actually born and raised in Brazil, in São Paulo. And I've been living in the West for about 12 years now, and then in Seattle since 2014. So it has been a little while now that I've been here. And I've been in the field of education for about 20 years now. So I started just when I was about 18. And I've been at Hilltop for almost 7 years, teaching first in preschool classrooms. And then during COVID times, I did a little bit of toddler and a little bit of here and there. And I've been a mentor, program mentor now for almost 3 years. Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite age group that you've worked with so far?
It changes, but I think toddlers always going to be, like one of my favorites. I think that usually the toddlers have a bad rap in general, and I think that
terrible twos.
The terrible twos. But I agree and disagree. So I think that they are one of my favorite ages for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love toddlers too. They're one of the groups that I can get the silliest with, I think, and I feel no kind of judgment from them. Even with some of the older children and preschoolers, every time I get a little silly, even they kind of have not too silly. But toddlers, they let you be as silly as you want. So one of the questions that I always ask guests is, why did you choose to work at Hilltop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was actually pondering this because I'm working to write this bio for another work event, and part of it is why did I join Hilltop? As I'm being reflecting on it, I think is that I did know about Hilltop when I was working in another school, which was a Reggio Emilia approach inspired, and Hilltop used to and still does host trainings and institute events, and I attend one of them, and I was really impressed by how well developed was their education field in terms of children's research, the role of the educator, the view of the child. I think a lot of things that I really appreciate about Hilltop values, and I try to carry those values myself too. And I think throughout my career, I always try to work and associate myself with places where my values are aligned, and I can translate those values into reality. So I always thought that Hilltop was one of those places that I could do that.
Yeah, similar. I think for me, working at Hilltop is being able to really be the educator that I want to be. And I feel like that's something that I have in common with a lot of educators here. In what ways do you feel as an educator you're able to share some of your passions or some of the specific curriculum that maybe you like to work with children?
Yeah. One of the things that I've always tried to bring to my classroom is just the kind of humanity that we all share together. So what does it make us? And I think for me, coming from a different country, for example, growing up, I have very different experiences from people that grew up here, obviously, in the general sense. So I think, but they still can find some commonalities. And I think that coming to the classroom, what are the things that we can share together that make us part of this global society in a way? So the meals that we share, the family systems that we belong to, the nature that is around us. So all those kind of big curriculum threads, but they can be break down to the classroom. It's just, I think the way at least I see it is that we belong into this vast ecosystem in the world.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And what we do has an impact as a human being, really. So how is that translated to the classroom? It's like through our curriculum and things like that.
So what do you think makes you you?
It's a great question. I think one of the things is that I like to do a lot of thinking. Like, I say that part of me is an overthinker, but I'm also like to think that I'm a critical thinking kind of person. And
You know, Paty, I don't think I hit record on this. No, but not.
let's start again.
Yeah, let's start again. I'm really sorry, Paty.
It's okay.
All right, so now that we know what we're going to start with, let's continue though. What makes you you? I can cut it and I can go back. So, what makes you you?
What makes me okay? I think I'm someone that like to think a lot. And I like to think about ecosystems, just like I was mentioning, and how do I move from one to the other. Like, I see myself as being someone that can kind of be transiting kind of across places and peoples and groups and communities. And I think I am someone that consider myself an immigrant and indigenous, so I carry some of my values around that. With me, that makes myself, that makes me me. And I just like to know how people think, and I'm just fascinated by human, in general, like the humanity that was speaking. I'm really fascinated by it. I always thought that maybe I should study anthropology when I was younger. I just really enjoy this, just the human in this general complex way.
Do you think that some of your experiences growing up in Brazil are able to offer a perspective that is needed in education, especially here in Seattle?
I want to say, I like to say yes, or I want to believe that. I think communities are strengthened by being, formed and with different, experiences, like people like coming from different backgrounds and experiences. And I think for me, I came from, a background where critical thinking, it was something very valued. My parents, they made sure that I went to this preschool, which was kind of going through a lot of turmoil and changes. But during that time when I was there starting preschool, they decided to move away from a traditional sense of pedagogy, which was all the let's trace the letter ABCs kind of ways, to the Pablo Freire pedagogy, which was a lot of deep thinking and critical thinking about the world and our place and how can we translate that work to reality. So during that time, it was prime time for children to be able to feel empowered and see themselves in that way and others in that way. So I think going back, and I'm like, to be able to go forward, I'm going back a little bit in time, but I think for me, one things that really formed and informed my thinking was that ability to just sit with another person and be able to have a dialogue and talk about either difficult things or big things, or go in depth about, thinking. And for a young child, it was very important because you feel seen and heard, and somebody's actually interested in what you have to say, even if you're just talking about nonsense. For a child, it's so important to feel seen and heard. So I think having that was something that was very very important to me growing up, and I try to bring that to wherever I go. I try to be very present in my conversations. I do believe in the quality of presence as a gift that we give to others, and I think it's a hard thing to do. I think in overall society we move so fast, and we need to do so many things, right? but having quality of presence is something that is really a gift that we can give to the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, I went to school for acting, which is something completely different. But in a way, it was very similar in that that's one of the things that you learn is how to be in the moment and how to be present, right? So that you're able to kind of give everything that is needed to whoever is there with you, and same, you're listening to hear, not to respond. And I think a lot of that is profound with working with children, because they are seen and they are heard, and it's kind of the opposite of what we've heard from children in the past of, to be seen and not heard, right? And I think to make them the focus really does give them this sense of I don't know, just confidence and an opportunity for them to continue to kind of just show who they are. I think that's important. I think none of us really know who we are. We're always trying to figure it out. But I think if we get a jump start from a young age, I think you have the leg up on a lot of other people who haven't really had that opportunity to think in that way. So I think that's great. Can you talk about some more about the curriculum involving Pablo Freire? Like, for somebody who has never used that here, how would you implement that in a preschool classroom?
Yeah, good question. One thing you can think about is, for example, elections, right? Election time. Even in a preschool classroom, you're going to probably hear some children talking about candidates or talking about something. It's something that they might see in the media, they might see at home, families talking about. So I think, what is the crux of children thinking about, election time? I think for me, what my takeaway is to talk about democracy, and talking about who is in the perceived power, how the hierarchy works, who needs what kind of role to make our country and states and city function. So all those big ideas can be just break down into like, okay, we have the system in place currently, it works in this way, but then what is how do you fit in the big ecosystem of things? So I think in the Paulo Freire, one thing that I try to make that correlation is that how do you feel yourself, and what impact can you have in this big ecosystem? So if it's election time, I will be probably talking about democracy, and I'll be talking about empowerment for young children. What does that look like to have power? Who has power? Who are the leaders? What does it mean to be a leader? And then we can talk about the leaders in your own community, in your classroom, in your school, right? Who knows the answers? Who do you go to? Do you know the answers? So I think that having those questions around that. Yeah,
being able to kind of explore the responsibilities of a leader, right? I think it's important. I think it's interesting too that similarly, I know Brazil has had some similar candidates, I think, to their presidential election, similar to kind of the US's candidates. We're not going to get into it, but how do you talk to parents who maybe have a very specific understanding of politics, or maybe somebody who has a very firm belief of their candidate? How do you kind of keep biases out but continue to teach children around elections?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, we're going to be working and serving families that have various different beliefs in terms of politics or religion, or whatever their take on the specific things are. So I think for me, I will go back to, okay, to me, we're going to talk about what does democracy looks like, what empowerment looks like. I think if they want to bring some thinking about candidates, because children might bring during lunchtime, my mom's gonna vote for so and so, and then another child might chime in and say, no, I heard that candidate is not good. So I think that is how you scaffold a little bit of thought without putting your bias. It's more about, tell me more about this. Why are you thinking this way? And every family is different. Your family think this way, your family thinks that way, and that's okay. We all have our ability to choose as part of the democracy, right? We're going to have our ability to choose our candidates according to our values. Giving a little bit the language and the space, but also it's like, each family is different, and that is their option to vote for whoever they want to vote, right?
How do you, I guess, have maybe uncomfortable conversations with families who maybe have a very strong opinion of politics, or maybe somebody who's pushing you to, push a particular narrative, or is there kind of a template that you have when you're speaking with parents around subjects that are maybe a little uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think in terms of politics in specific,
or any specific uncomfortable topic. I think politics is an example, but if there is a particular curriculum that you're working on that you feel is necessary because maybe children are bringing it up in the classroom, how do you work with parents that might be uncomfortable with particular topics?
Yeah, and I think it's about a partnership that we build throughout time. I think one thing that I used to do, especially when I was in classroom as an educator, I think since the very beginning of the school year, we talk a lot about values. These are the values that are strong in my classroom. This is how we live them. One thing is, for example, I don't know, it could be community, right? Community is a very important value for me and my co-teachers in this classroom. You're gonna hear us talking about community throughout the school year.
Sure.
And I think I like to be very specific with my language when I'm talking to children and with families. So to me, social justice and anti-bias work is weaved into their daily lives. It's just not just when an event is happening. It's also when an event's happening because you're responding to it, but actually you're doing every day.
Right. Every
day you're talking about it, right? Every day when they're maybe saying something or choosing something, we're like, let's think a little bit more about that. So I think that exemplifying, making it visible, the work that you do on a daily basis, when those things happen, you can start linking one thing to the other. So for example, when I talk about the elections, I'm just giving this example because it was a real example in my classroom, right? The presidential elections in 2020, and we talk about democracy because children were talking about bringing a lot of strong feelings about candidates, so our families. So it's like we're going to open this to talk about democracy, but also about leadership and about empowerment. So we start asking them if they wanted to have jobs in the classroom as leaders. We actually interview leaders in your class, in your school, and you were one of them that we interviewed back then. And then we connected, and that was exploration for months long, and we connected with other threads that were going on throughout our year with curriculum. And I think that the more you make it visible that it's not just one moment in time that we are capturing, it's actually is the daily life that you are. I think families feel much more part of it too, because every time that we did any curriculum, we wanted the partnership with families, so they actually were pretty excited to be part of it, and bring a little bit of their own ideas. Like we will give a little bit of homework to families, like, what is your idea about leadership? Who is the leader in your house? Because sometimes the kids will be using that language. Oh, the leader in my house is my mom.
Sure, yeah.
and then the family will laugh about it. So I think bring the families in the conversations. It helps create less of the tension and provides more dialogue, really.
Yeah, I remember that project that you guys worked on in your classroom. I think for me, one of the things that I really appreciate about this approach is because it does kind of call back to one of our values, which is learning and relationship. And I think it's that, that relationship piece that is key to learn, because if it is something that's uncomfortable or it is something that is, complex, I think that relationship piece is crucial, right? I think that's that trust that is built, that is able to kind of help you in your work and then help families understand your work. I think that's very important. Can you share a little bit about and I'm just kind of going back a little bit because that's the example we use around
Yeah.
politics and elections. But like, do you ever have a hard time with parents who might perceive you as having an agenda when teaching their children? And then how do you go about, letting them understand that perhaps there isn't an agenda and the work is still necessary?
Yeah, I think it happened to a certain extent. I think the family was a little bit cautious, a little bit. They're not necessarily concerned, but they were a little bit cautious, and I think they wanted to learn a little bit more about what the work we were doing, so they could understand more. So they're coming with the lens of like, I myself am not versed into this, but it looks like you are, but I am afraid because now my child is going to be talking about this at home.
Yeah.
And they never brought this at home. But so can you explain a little bit more? So with that way, then we set up a meeting. Then we went back a little bit with the curriculum. This is what we've been working on, and these are all the questions and the conversations that children have been bringing to the table. And this is how, as a teaching team, and then we kind of connected the dots for the family, and we give them some resources sometimes, or and really sometimes it's just goes back to children to feel seen and heard. They are questioning because they are curious about something specific, could be politics, and they just kind of want to understand, why is everybody talking about this? Why? They want to be in the loop too. They want to understand what is about that. What is it? There's something about that. So I think it's just really approaching with that curiosity, and see where that is leading. And I think that after having more of a dialogue with the family, we're able to do more partnership around that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think I also think too, to stray away from topics, especially topics that children are aware of, I think it can be harmful. I think it creates kind of this anxiety for children, right? They keep hearing this word or this thing, but nobody's explaining to them what it is. It can create kind of this curiosity that can either become negative because they don't know, or positive because they've been relieved or they've been reassured. I think that's important, and I think a lot of times parents don't understand that. And I think they'd rather just say, "You're not old enough. We're not even going to discuss it." So that's one of the things I appreciate, as some of our educators do, is just not stray away from those conversations.
Right, and then one thing too, excuse me, that I remember reflecting back then is giving children an outlets for them to. It's not only the dialogue, but for example, there's a lot of anxiety, like you're saying. They might be sitting with a lot of confusion because everybody's talking about this, and I don't know exactly what is that. Sometimes it's very convoluted, complex ideas. So giving some intentional spaces for them to process some information. So I think that in the past I had a circle of control for children to do. So we sat down together. You put inside, what can we do about it? And they had some ideas. What is outside that we cannot do anything about it? And I think helping, also giving children some visuals for them to understand big things there, because it can be a scary thing too, right? And it's like, this is what you can do about it. There's all the things that you can let go. Also align with that is understanding of their own feelings. So oftentimes children can be viewed as only being able to hold one feeling, either happy or sad or angry, but actually they're just like us. They're very complex in their feelings and emotions, so they are holding a lot of feelings together, and it's just helping them find the vocabulary for it too. So I think that goes alongside helping them with those big feelings about, for example, elections, going back to politics or something, processing activities that are intentional, processing dialogue and feelings, I think is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, one of the things that I get brought up a lot when I'm speaking with families is, my child has big feelings. He doesn't know how, or they don't know how to, articulate it or express it in a way that I want. And I've had conversations with families of, they don't necessarily have to express it in a way that you want. And I think being able to give them an outlet or give them the tools to be able to, one, recognize and be aware of what it is that they're feeling, so that then they can process it in their own way. Is there any specific things that you do with children to kind of help them learn that social emotional awareness that can help them express some of those feelings?
Yeah, there's this one that I mentioned, the circle of control, which was helpful. For example, children that were going to kindergarten from pre-K, they had a lot of anxiety about going to kindergarten.
Big school.
Yeah, and sometimes it starts even in May or April, because families are already thinking about it and enrolling, and the children are sitting with their feelings and not quite sure what to do about it. So I think putting like an outlet, doing a circle of control. So this is all you can do about it. So what do you know about kindergarten that you can focus on? Oh, I know my kindergarten has a great playground, and I'm very, So I think it's just helping them put in the paper outside of their brain somewhere, and they brought it home and they did it together with their families too. Is one thing. I think I did the iceberg for feelings concept. So you have a drawing of an iceberg. So in the tip of the iceberg is what you can see. So looks like your face is angry, but what is actually happening underneath? So we had this discussion, and some children like, because I'm hungry, so I'm hungry, I feel angry, but I'm actually not necessarily angry, I'm actually hungry. And then we talk about being hangry, or disappointed, or frustrated, or other things that your face looks angry, but maybe you have more things internalized. So, and having that visual was very helpful. So those are just two things that I can remember that I've done quite recently with children, and it was very meaningful for them too.
Yeah, kindergarten transition is a big one, right? I think even more so recently with kind of COVID setting back a lot of children. I think developmentally we saw with COVID children maybe not being as ready for kindergarten, and a lot of families having that anxiety themselves of, my child is not ready. Is there, I know that you used to work in a preschool classroom that got children ready for kindergarten. Is there a way that parents can know that my child is going to be okay in kindergarten, or is there anything specific that you look for as an educator to say, I know that my student will be ready for the next step because I see these things that they've accomplished?
Yeah. One of the things is, the independence, self-help skills. I want to make sure that the student feels empowered to be able to take care of that little, the little ecosystem they have in there, which is their cubby, their body, their belonging. So I think it's very important to have that one of that area really basically good to go. So that means they're able to transition in and out. They can go to the bathroom, they can come back, they can, take their jacket, put it on. So all that self-help skills is very empowering for children to have that. So make sure that, one, they are able to take care of themselves that way. Alongside that is also the social emotional. So having some social language that they can at least, be able to do some collaborative and some playtime that they can enter play, maintain play, even exiting play, and be able to communicate that to each other. I think having some very simple scripts, my hope is that by the time they go to kindergarten, they have some simple scripts so they know how to enter play, maintain, exit, as well as just also very simple scripts for solve problem. So usually around that time, they are very good at negotiation. They love to negotiate everything and anything. Just 2 more minutes, just 2 more minutes, just 1 minute, just 5 minutes. But I think hopefully by that time, we are hoping they have very good negotiation skills, and they're able to actually figure out how to solve problems to a certain degree, right? Semi-independently at least. And there's some skills that we are hoping they are able to identify the names and write their own names, and having really curiosity about literacy in the general umbrella of literacy and communication,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's great that I think hearing about scripts or particular things that they can use to enter and exit play, or I think as a parent, most parents have that fear that their child is not going to be able to make friends and not going to be able to enjoy themselves and rather be lonely at school. I think that's a big part of it, so I think that's very helpful to just be like, let's give them the script that they can use for those moments where they do want to play with another friend, and at the same time how to exit, because like you said, they know how to, they love to negotiate, so a lot of the times they don't like to end the fun that they're having, so that can create another challenge. So to be able to say, okay, here's my time to exit, I think is important. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was your role as a mentor educator. So you've worn many hats as an educator with many different ages and classrooms. How do you feel when trying to help educators be better educators, right? Because now you're the teacher for the teachers, and how is that approach similar or different than your approach with children?
Yeah, it's actually very similar.
Really?
Yeah. Well, to a certain degree, I think about my work as a mentor. We do a lot of ZPD, which is on a proximal development for children, but it also can be applied, for example, for adults in various fields, right? It's like you cannot do even with help, cannot do with help, can do with help, do without help. So I think there's different levels of different things. So I think when I'm in partnership with educators, I like to identify where I can just watch and observe, where should I step in and do it so they can watch, where can we do it together, and how, because I think I want to get where they can do it and I just can observe or I can just be with them, right? So I think identify the different areas where they're at, just like with children. It's helpful for me, so I can be more effective when I really want them to, or challenge them to get there in their skill set. Is one way, it's one thing. I think for me too, and one thing that is a little bit different but not quite is just as an educator and as a mentor, I feel that I'm connecting the dots. So sometimes as an educator, I connected the dots for children around things. So that looks like scaffolding what's happening. And I think that, for example, sometimes the child might be like just so much like playing like this, but they forget that it's the whole classroom exists sometimes.
Yeah, that peripheral is important. Again, another thing I've learned in my acting is that how do you take in as much as possible with kind of your periphery, but at the same time, focus on what you're working on and still being aware of the other things. I think it's important. What would you say is the biggest challenge working with other educators?
I think challenge-wise is alongside the same thing that is the greatest thing about this role, is that for me, I have to really be there and be in partnership with educators to be able to understand how they operate, how they think, so I can help them. And I think the challenge is, it comes along with that is, the quality of presence, right? Because if I'm not fully present, I'm gonna miss something, I'm gonna make maybe an assumption, or I'm gonna jump to conclusions, and I'm not going to be helpful, or I'm gonna step in when I should not, or vice versa. So I think my biggest challenge is that I have to wear some other hats, administrative hats, or some other hats too, and that can sometimes impact my ability to be present or to listen. So I really try to remember that other things can wait right now. Now is my time to be in this classroom and just be here with this educator, even if it's just 10 minutes, and then I go back.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's the kind of being in the in the trenches with them, for lack of a better word, right? Just being able to have that same perspective because you're also experiencing it. I couldn't tell you how many times as an educator before I came to Hilltop, a place with the mentor, a program, that I just dismissed other people's advice because I said, you're not in the classroom with me, you don't know what's going on. And I think as an educator, especially, you know, in the U.S. public school system, it can be very lonely in a classroom of 20 students, right? And it can be very, very isolating to just, you know, sit there and kind of just suffer by yourself, or lack of a better word. I think a lot of the times the systems that are in place to support educators aren't really, aren't really helpful. I think one of the things that I loved about Hilltop when I came was the mentor educator program, and I know we took some time off of it, but I'm glad that it's back because I think it's profound work for educators. I think it helps families understand that we're taking all approaches to helping their children and supporting them and their needs in the classroom, and then as well as kind of just being that extra adult to kind of help with whatever a child may need is great.
And making a little bit of the bridge between the admin, administrative work, and educators, families and educators, and educators.
Sure.
So I think that the mentor kind of role is also being a lot of a bridge and kind of, like I said, connecting the dots. Sometimes connecting the dots for learning too. And like you said, being there in the trenches, and it's especially like that. And I think the same thing for children that want to be seen and heard. I think the same thing for adults.
Yeah, an extra person to see and hear them, right?
And even if you don't have a solution, sometimes they don't want it. They just want you to be there and in partnership, really.
Yeah, I think.
And to be challenged too. Sometimes
The challenge, and I think it's to also learn. Something specific about teachers that maybe they don't know for themselves, or they don't. I think just to be that person and say, I've noticed this, and that's something that I didn't know about myself, but I'm glad because I want to grow that skill or build that skill. So we only have about 10 more minutes left. Is there anything that you would like to talk about specifically about you, about your approach to working with children, about education in general, or anything you just want to share about you personally? That would be a good time.
Yeah. I was just reflecting about the mentorship, kind of what does it look like? Who am I? Am I a mentor? And I was going to, when you posed that question earlier, and now that we had this conversation, I'm like, I think my identity is actually very tied to being a mentor.
Yeah.
Itself, really. I think I do really enjoy, thinking about people and seeing people and hearing them and being there to that level, I think, as a person myself. And I also like to connect people to either ideas or thinking or other people. So I think who I am as a person is also who I am professionally as a mentor.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember, you were an educator, and then you became a mentor, and then you went back into the classroom, and I think we called you back, right? We said we needed you in this role because I think not only do you see yourself in this way, but we also saw you in this way, and I think that's one thing for myself too, as an admin person that used to do well, I think, as a teacher, is that sometimes you're more needed in the bigger picture. To kind of create the Paty's of the world, so that again, this can be better for our children. Do you think that now having both perspectives of going back and forth has helped you in your newer chapter as a mentor?
Yes, I think so too. I think that going back to the classroom for a few months, it was just refreshing in a different way, and it also made me realize how much work it needs to be put in every day, but also as a mentor I could see to how much the ripple effect you can have. So I just have a more deeper appreciation for both roles, doing this back and forth than I had it before.
Yeah, I think we've noticed it here at our downtown location, right? I think there's a great group of educators here that I think needed somebody to just kind of get them to blossom, get them to kind of tap into their their skills and all the wonderful things they have to offer. So I think it's an important piece of being a mentor, just being that person to give them the space to say, be you in a way that's going to show up for our children. What would you say is the biggest challenge as a mentor?
I think again is just wearing different hats, and knowing when to apply each, right? So I think I'm getting the hang of it, but I think that sometimes it would be challenging I want to maybe challenge an educator to maybe rethink some thinking around something they always thought about. So like expand some of their thinking. And sometimes they might get some pushback, but I think that it's not necessarily a challenge, but it's a good challenge to have. The way I take it, at least, is a good, I do enjoy engaging in discussions and just expand their thinking, right? So I think sometimes I know that can be challenging for some folks, but it's a challenge that I'm happy to take on too.
Yeah, it's kind of that Pablo Freire approach, right? That critical thinking of kind of unraveling that thought. I think, I really enjoyed having you on. I think, and our hope is for you to help co-host some of these episodes for us. Is there anything that you would like to bring to the podcast that you think would make for better discussions, or are there any topics specifically that you really just want to unravel with different experts or just different educators?
Yeah, I would love to, and I think it goes back to what I'm passionate about too, but what I want to see people to be able to express themselves, like how people do express their inspiration and joy, and who are you in the classroom, like how do you bring yourself to work. And I think having the space to maybe showcase or explain or dive a little bit deeper, who are you and why are you bringing this, what is this how is your impact, and how do you see yourself. I think that I don't have a specific thing, but I think it's more about getting to know our community members, and there's a lot of topics to explore that can be also in an emerging way too. But I think that I would love to have our community know more about our community members too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, again, that I decided to work at Hilltop, was letting them be myself. And I think it's that. I think it's the emergent, needs of the adults and the children kind of colliding together. And where does your passion intersect with children's learning, and how do we kind of connect those two? That's always been my passion in education, of sharing, my creative side, whether it be acting or whether it be puppetry or, podcasting. It's, here's what I love to learn, or what I love to do. How do I help children learn specific things that they want to, using those things that I love, I think is important. I think it helps the work. Because I think this job is a tough job. So I think bringing that passion and that love helps kind of continue this in a way that doesn't feel so much of a burden.
And what stories you want to tell, right? And I think it goes to me back to like what stories are you telling about yourself, to others, about your children, and can we tell different stories, or can retell stories again? So I think it could be an interesting way of approaching.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I also did want to ask you too before we sign off is, I know that you're a very spiritual person. How would you say that just being a spiritual person can tap into the success of children's learning? I think for me, that's one thing that I have always wanted for myself, but I've always kind of struggled in a way that I never really have learned how to tap into it. So how would you say you can do that with children?
I think I want to see them, and I say I want to because sometimes it is hard, right? This work is hard, and it comes to adults the way I view too, but I like to think, especially for children and adults, the educators I work with, in a holistic way, and that means they have value, intrinsically value. They are just they have value regardless of who and what they're doing. They are, and I think to me, I try to honor them in that way. And coming from that, I feel that I can be more open and more authentic in my way of expressing and being with them. because to me that's it. They have intrinsic value as just being alive there.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, the holistic approach is definitely, I know, something that our families really appreciate, and educators as well.
And I also have my indigenous ancestors, and I do this because it's how I think. I feel they are behind me, and it's how I always feel. My ancestors, they're always behind me, and the gifts and the challenge and all of that I carry with me, and is a very important piece for me. And my identity and my experiences, and seeing that way with that lens too. I like it's almost like as a purpose. I have a purpose, and it's tied to how I want to my experience to be, and connected to my ancestors too.
Yeah, it almost makes it feel like your struggle, you're not living it alone, right? And
Correct.
You have the support from your ancestors, and just from those who have lived those same struggles. So it is reassuring to know that. Well, thank you, Paty.
Thank you.
I look forward to some more of these together, and until next time, this is Emergent Conversations. Okay.